we seem to have a category, and we seem to know what it is. Um, but what is it? I mean, in the past, we've had history of avant-garde, but we haven't had a differentiation necessarily as a form like installation, which is without a sort of historical passage. It just appeared and became a fact of the art world. It's almost an institutional category. But what else? How does it function? Why did installation arise? And what's the difference between being a painter and being an installation artist, or being a sculptor and being an installation artist?
So is it part of it, Jonathan, the change of modernism, and then particularly with like some of the land art in the '60s and all, we're putting the spectator and Robert Morris, that it's a three-way connection between the artwork, the environment, and the viewer, and kind of a change of, rather than looking at artwork as an independent object, rather that it's a situation that you interact with.
So the idea of situation comes up, a sort of almost situational aesthetics, an extended field of vision, a disavowal of Kant's formalism. So a sort of idea of deform or formlessness. Um, but it also arose with the new museum. We got around the world these constructions of new contemporary art spaces. So it arose with the contemporary. And there's spectacular installations which launched these city-state exhibition places, so like Bilbao or the Tate. But all around the world, they open out spaces which are vast. And what do you associate installation with theoretically? There's a word which was bandied around 20 years ago, or a term was bandied around 20 years ago. What was it?
Well, I put phenomenology as one of the terms.
Is it relational aesthetics?
Relational aesthetics was what I was. And what is relational aesthetics? What's it predicated upon?
Um, well, on I don't know if I could sum it up very concisely, but it comes from Pierre Bourdieu, not Bourdieu, Bourdieu, Nicolas Bourdieu.
Okay, so Duchamp proposed that all objects under certain conditions could be works of art. Joseph Beuys proposed that all subjects were artists. Everyone's an artist. And Burrow, with the relation aesthetics, in a way proposed that all situations could be considered part of a work of art. So, for instance, um, serving tea could be as much an installation work as a physical structure. So social relations were included. So you have any object can be a work of art, any subject could be an artist, and any situation could correspond to being an aesthetic situation. So it opened out a kind of promiscuity of what the artwork was, and what it ended the speculative content of art in a way, because it made art into just something that you um, came across with these spaces, and it suspended the critical vantage point of, well, what is a work of art? It became a spectacle of the new museum. What else? Let's let's just go through the slides. So someone read the words. These are the main concepts I was thinking about. Who wants to begin? Vanda.
Okay. Immersion, hybridity, limit, space, light, excess, encounter, presentation, formless, mutability, scatter, network, spectacle, assemblage, indeterminacy.
And would you privilege any of those words over others?
Presentation.
Yes.
Or, yeah. Assemblage.
Assemblage, definitely.
Counter as well.
Encounter, yeah, very much so.
Spectacle.
Spectacle, definitely is a spectacle. So some have social connotations like spectacle. Indeterminacy is another, probably. But different words have different weightings to them. And they work in different combinations. Vanda.
Installation art has become virtually synonymous with the idea of contemporary art, and yet it neither stands as an aesthetic category nor an art historical passage. It does not have formal features other than a generic sense of what it is. When a curator organizes a showing space, it is referred to as an install, even though it might not share the features of being an installation. There are also no shared ideological values other than having a sense of democratic openness, which might imply a benign orientation. All that can be claimed is that there appears to be a logic of self-staging.
So I was thinking that the earliest installation art was in fact cave art. We start with installation art. It's not, it comes to us late in a different form.
The earliest recording of the aesthetic gesture is without any framing device other than by the fluctuation of light. The cave presented the immersive environment that divided the light of the day from the shadow realm of the image. Thus, the image corresponded to flickering light, just as the voice was related to the echo within the stone chamber.
This is a Chola, this is a Gupta period, 5th century fresco painting.
The cave gradually mutated into the sacred realm in which images of the gods might be assembled. This was a presentation of the elsewhere of space and the experience of otherness.
So the Gupta period was the height of Indian, it was like the Renaissance of India. But it created a template for Buddhist sculpture and painting. This is Giotto. So this is a fresco painting in Assisi.
In the monastery of San Marco in Florence, Fra Angelico painted a series of frescoes in the cells for the monks. The unique feature of these frescoes is that they had a private relationship to each individual monk that corresponded to a biblical reading. Fra Angelico, Mockery of Christ, 1441.
If you ever go to Florence, it's really worth seeing. It's really quite special. Each cell has a painting. Each cell consists of a bed, a window, and a Bible, and a painting.
Stone buildings developed from the memory of confined cave spaces. Cathedrals, churches, and monasteries were constructed, and frescoes became the dominant form of inner immersion. The light entering such spaces, as well as the light reflected from the image realm that served to transmit the otherness of these spaces. Giotto's paintings in Assisi and Padua exemplify the development of fresco painting.
This is a fresco by It's in, oh God, I've forgotten. It's Mantegna, Mantua. It's Mantegna. And everything's painted. So the columns, the textiles, everything is illusion. But it starts off from the experience of the court. So it's everyday life of the court, rather than being sort of religious elsewhere.
Mantegna was commissioned to paint a fresco that represented the life and structure of the Gonzaga family. This fresco signified the shift from the sacred to the secular realm.
This is Islamic 15th century in Samarkand.
The internal space of many of the great Islamic mosques take the beholder through the different dimensions of space. The passage between the third and fourth dimension is occasioned through subtle modulation of geometrical patterns and intensities of colour. This Edo period interior shows a setting of aesthetic objects in harmony with the structure.
The Monet painting.
The late Claude Monet paintings of his Water Lily Garden, the scale of the work introduces the quality of immersion. They are in contradiction to the origin of Impressionism, which inaugurated plein air paintings. These paintings introduce the idea of painting as installation. Lizitsky, Brown Room, 1923. The early Russian avant-garde experimented with the presentational forms of art. In this installation, L. Lizitsky extended his graphical system of notation into an extended relation of space, matter, and relation. Kurt Schwitters reconstructed Merzbau, 1933. The Merzbau was an extension of Schwitter's collage practice into real space, which implied being able to occupy an imaginary space into actual 3 dimensions.
This is one of the earliest surrealist exhibitions.
Amazing.
Like a spider's web.
Yeah.
Surrealist exhibitions introduced different strategies for the installation of the art. This was partly related to altering the perception related to disturbing the notion of clear vision.
So a new reader. This is Matisse, south of France. Who wants to read?
I'll go for a little bit. Henri Matisse designed the entire interior of the Chapelle du Rosaire de Vence in 1949. The Rothko Chapel, 1964, was designed as a non-denominational space. Both examples are demonstrations of the aspiration of a total work of art.
This is Roscoe. This is Barnett Newman, and the idea of a painting being a formless object so big that you couldn't see the whole of it, you couldn't take it all in. So it sort of tried to literalize the relationship to being the object as a sublime object. It's called Rothko and Barnett Newman. Besides being called abstract expressionists, we're called abstract sublime art.
The work of some of the abstract expressionists, such as Barnett Newman and Mark Rothko, there is an aspiration to introduce the spectator into the sensation of the sublime. This was approached through extending both the scale and intensity of the works beyond immediate perceptual absorption.
This is Yves Klein, The Void, 51. He He exhibited an empty space.
Yves Klein explored the notion of the void through his use of the color blue, IKB, Yves Klein blue, through performance and gesture. In one exhibition, he simply displayed an empty white space with an empty vitrine. The room, he claimed, contained an invisible pictorial state. Alan Caprow, Yard, 1961. Caprow merged installation and performance together into a structure of the happening.
This is Robert Rauschenberg. He was experimenting with interactive. So lights came on as the bodies passed. It picked up, it sensed the spectator and interacted with the spectator.
Robert Rauschenberg opened out his work to experiments in the use of technology. In this work, there are sound and light sensors that are combined to the visual representations. Thus, installation is linked to the structures of bodily interaction.
There's a footnote to this. These sound and light sensors were used in the Vietnam War. So developed by the military. So when they bombed it with partly with bombs, but partly with these sensors, so they could pick up movement of troops, or urine traces, or heat traces. So it's the beginnings of electronic warfare through microelectronics.
David Madala, Cloud Canyons, 1964. Madala developed a form of kinetic art that was a mutation of machine and the substances they generated. As installations, they embodied the idea of the formless and the indeterminate. Victor Bergen, Photopath, 1967. Was that at the exhibition when form becomes matter or ideas become form?
This is the ICA. So it's one of the main. I mean, it's one of the works which attracted the most attention. It's black and white photographs of the floorboards.
Oh, sorry, it's on here. The exhibition When Attitudes Become Form, 1969, introduced a new approach to showing works. At times, it was possible to distinguish each work, but at other times not so. It became closer to an experience of an installation speaking in a common language.
I saw that show. It was absolutely a revelation. I mean, it felt like a revelation at the time.
Robert Morris, Untitled, Scatterpiece, 1968-9.
I mean, it's really blew apart the relationship to discrete objects and formal discrete objects and objects of refined beauty. And
The sense of discrete objects in space gradually gave way to the principle of scattering objects in space in order to reveal the process whereby things might become assembled. Richard Serra, in the work Gutter Splashes, stressed the process of production over the finished or completed object, which stressed time as a principle of sculpture. This implied a gesture that stood in opposition to formalist aesthetics. Richard Serra, early work as a meeting point between sculpture and installation.
Richard Serra. Yeah.
Bruce Nauman, Natural Light, Blue Light Room, 1971.
So you've got the natural light on the one corner, and in the other you've got blue neon light. So it's two lights or two light sources.
Instead of attention being drawn to the object in space, the space itself was deemed to be the more interesting focus of attention.
It's Elio Ortesico, and it showed in 1969 in the Whitechapel. It was created by Guy Brett. It introduced a whole new aesthetic, which was not just because it came from Brazil, but it kind of had another dimension to it as far as the use of materials, and it had a kind of great sense of bodily interaction, and it had a warmth and a kind of feeling of new textures for art.
I think should pass the baton on to someone else for reading here, Jonathan.
Okay, so who's next? Come on.
I can read, but I don't know how to pronounce the first name.
Ortesico. Hello, Ortesico.
Okay, Helio Ortesica coined the phrase Tropicala for an exhibition in 1967. It was then part of the Tropicalismo movement that resisted military repression of the culture.
This is Ortesico. This is Kusuma.
Yayoi Kusama emerged with the new work avant-garde in the 1960s at a time when the counterculture and the art became linked. She produced a series of mirror or infinity rooms that created a sensation of never-ending space. But it was not until the advent of a new wave of artists that her work became widely recognized for its significance.
Sorry about the spelling.
One's mind and the earth are in constant state of erosion. Mental rivers wear away abstract banks. Brainwaves undermine cliffs of thought. Ideas decompose into stones of unknowing, and conceptual crystallizations break apart into deposits of gritty reason. Robert Smithson. Joseph Boy's honey pump at the workplace for Documenta in 1977. Electric motors pumped honey through a gigantic assemblage of pipes in the stairwell of the museum, symbolizing the circulation of life and flowing energy.
I mean, this work had such an enormous impact at the time.
Joseph Beuys redefined the parameters of sculpture, both in terms of materials, mediums, and dimensions. In this way, he linked performance, gesture, presentation, and assemblage into a network of effects.
It's Joseph Beuys. So felt, torches, and slaves. This is an installation we did in London. I saw this work. It was fabulous. You crouched to get into the space, and the space had a warmth to it. It had a kind of very strange sound as you went in as well.
Was the piano ever?
Anti-Doffy Gallup.
Was the floor accidental or deliberate?
That was given.
Okay.
That was just the fact he was working with.
And is it felt? What are those?
It's felt, so the whole room was rolls of felt from floor to ceiling. Hence the muffled, when people talked in a room, it was muffled, the sound was muffled, and there was a sort of warmth in the room.
That's interesting too, because the dampeners on the oh gosh, I don't remember what they're called. The things that strike the cables inside the piano have these felt feet on them.
Yeah.
That's yeah.
Was it oppressive? Did it feel oppressive to be inside?
It was a mixture. I mean, sort of, it was highly immersive. And it destabilized you.
Because you're like you're
Had a
in
very
like a
strong
bullet.
bodily effect. Had a very strong bodily effect, but it could be pleasure. Could be pleasurable or mysterious.
Also, could it be preconception bias of some sort of forms? My understanding of Boy's use of felt was his personal experience of being saved his life. The felt and all the others through the war, and his sort of obsessive use of felt, his sort of life form
He changed.
linked to some sort of
He changed the use of materials. He, instead of steel and casting and traditional sculptural materials, he used honey and felt and wax, so soft materials.
And lard.
And lard. I mean, everything was soft and organic, and so he changed the relationship between the nature and materiality.
The
And
position.
everything had a performivity to it. Materials performed. They were in time. They were alive. They interacted actively. They were not static.
Which is absolutely the genius of putting the piano in there, in that space.
Yeah.
You can instantly feel the felt dampening the sound.
This is the late work by Boris. This is the read on.
In this untitled 1969 work by Yanis Kounelis,
Yeah.
the principles of Art Povera are at play, expressing a trend towards the use of ordinary or raw materials such as rocks, branches, soil, coal, wax, and discarded clothes. This employment of materials often emphasized qualities such as smell and weight of things. Bricolage relates to the idea of construction from a diverse range of things and materials that have a starting point in disorder, that in turn might come to indicate a new or novel unifying gesture. Mario Mertz, Igloo. Do we go around houses, or do houses go around us?
This is a work by Richard Wilson, and it consists of pump oil. And I mean, it's very disconcerting when Saatchi bought the work. And in a space, you went into this, walked into the space, and you thought, what is it? What, you didn't know what was happening. You didn't know what was. You got a perfect reflection of the roof. It completely threw you. I think it's still on display at Saatchi's. I think so, anyway.
It also smells really intensely of petroleum or tar.
Yeah, it's sump oil. So it has a smell, but it's the reflection is immaculate. Nothing disturbs the reflection, so it's a perfect mirror. It's very strange.
Richard Wilson's work, 2050, takes its name from recycled engine oil that is thick, black, and therefore functions like a mirror. At first sight, it might disorientate the viewer because the reflection of the surrounding architecture is perfect, so it becomes almost impossible to stabilize the relationship to the visual field.
This is a work that Anish Kapoor did for the Venice Biennale. And in fact, he won the main prize of Venice Biennale for this work. or shared the main prize. But literally, the stones are cut away from the inside in a symmetrical shape, and you just get this black hole. You're not sure if the black is a space or whether it's just a diagrammatic representation of a space. And it picks up upon Eastern, well, particularly Zen aesthetics, so it mutates Zen aesthetics with minimalism.
Anish
I
Kapoor,
saw that work at the, I think that was at the, you won the Turner Prize for that as well. And I think the Turner exhibition was at the RA, I think. Anyway, I saw the exhibition. And inside those holes, it's full of very, very intense pigment. And so after about 1 hour, one day of the exhibition, all the walls were completely smothered with pigment because you could put your hand inside. You were meant to put your hand inside. And so the walls were just smothered with paint because people get paint all over their hands. So it's very interesting. I really love that piece.
I think it was his best piece he ever made.
I agree. I have the brochure for that's one of the books I ever bought. You know, when you go to an exhibition, I still have.
I knew him at that period. We had long conversations about aesthetics, and so someone, Sharon, the last one.
Anish Kapoor created this work void filled through carving out the inside of large stones in which only a small void space became visible. The question might have emerged, are the rocks empty inside or are they full? The installation was thus an arrangement of rocks, but also of a series of questions about the mystery of space within and without. This work displayed both a minimalist aesthetic, but also a flavor of Zen.
Next person.
I'll go.
Yeah.
Wolfgang Lieb will spend several months collecting pollen in order to create his installations. The installation is then a memory of the time expended and the presentation of this accumulated memory. His work combines a relationship to the work of Malevich and his absorption of mystical ideas absorbed from his time in India. Tatsu Miyajima, Sea of Time.
These are small electronic units which just go from 0 to 10 or 0 to 9. So there's an infinite sea of numbers.
Tatsuo Miyajima utilized LED elements as his principal medium for constructing his art. The Sea of Time presents an infinite variation of temporal becomings. James Turrell, Key Line. Jenny Holzer started her aesthetic practice by pasting provocative statements upon the surfaces of the city and eventually utilized large-scale technological interfaces in order to transmit these messages.
Jenny Olson.
Ilya and Emilia Kabakov, The Eminent Direction of Thoughts.
This is shown at the Tate.
One of them just passed away, didn't? I think this past year, yeah.
Yeah.
In 2003, Atman told an interviewer that using talking heads is something you're supposed to do when making proper documentaries. But I allow my subjects to talk because only in actual speech can we witness this amazing rewriting of one's history and reality. What else is there? Talking is the only meaningful activity we are capable of.
This work was shown in London in Holden, we just used Stupi, we just used industrial building. It was one of the great works of that period of relational aesthetics. Each screen shows a different interview, and you went around sitting in chairs according to who else was in the room. You'd each make a different journey through the space, hear different voices, and make a different portrait of that area of Istanbul, which is called Cuba.
It's also very political because of the sort of repression that was going on in, well, still is going on in Turkey, but it was like the beginning, I guess, of that whole repressive wave. And he's gay, and he was particularly, I guess, sensitive to that whole authoritarian political approach.
It was a sort of out zone. It was the police didn't enter, and it made up of a lot of refugees and outsiders, as you say, gays, but also had criminal elements as well. So it was self-regulating. So it was a kind of community which made its own rules up, and very resistant to the Turkish state, as you just stated. Liam Gillock is very much part of the rubric of relational aesthetics. Rachel Wrightwood. Does anyone know the work of Sierra, Santiago Sierra?
I think the most well-known one is where he hired these guys and tattooed the line on their back.
That's correct. What's happening here?
I think isn't on this one he's got people inside them that he's paid to be in there, if I remember right.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And it's called the remuneration system. They're each paid a standard fee, very small fee, in fact. This is made up of barbed wire. It's Kirsten Hollow installation of Tate. So you get also the incorporation of, in the 60s, there was participation art, Leisure Clark and David Medalla. In the later period, you get the revival of not just installation, but participation. So you get preoccupations with social conditions, networks, ecology, sort of narratives of otherness. This Ai Weiwei, all the belongings to a displaced citizen. I think there was a dam being constructed and they're thrown out of their homes. And these are all the objects which were assembled inside. This is work we visited. We did a visit to this Mark Nelson show Could someone talk about the Mike Nelson show, his experience of a visit? It has quite a strong effect on some. Could anyone describe the effect of it?
It was vast. Certainly in the realm of installation, a lot of, well, obviously recognizable objects that you'd see. I mean, this image that you've got here is a little bit different because it references the Smithson, the buried woodshed and all. But it was really, I think, using the objects to curate your experience walking through the space, and not so much about the individual objects.
Mike Nelson took over the entire space of the Hayward Gallery to assemble a work called Extinction Beckons. It is closer to an encounter with a cinematic set based on the principle of a labyrinth.
This is a dark room, which was below the first slide, was the dark room. And then we did another visit to Anselm Kiefer, and his work based on the novel Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce. Would anyone like to talk about the experience?
Just that I would say I felt it was much more focused, or it was primarily focused on the feeling than the specific objects. And obviously the objects had relevance, but the feeling was the dominant thing for me.
I mean, it's highly theatrical. You went into a darkened corridor with all these objects on shelves, and then off center were spaces which were huge in scale. And you get this relationship, this woven relationship between sentences from, or half sentences from Finnegan's Wake and these objects in vitrines very often. So the vitrines were very well crafted. You get a lot of rotting material, a lot of decay, feeling of the weight of time, the texture of time.
It's like a fetishization of the warehouse.
Yeah.
Anselm Kiefer assembled a massive installation based on James Joyce's novel Finnegan's Wake. The space of the exhibit weaves words from the book with the objects and paintings in ways that blend various mediums together.
I felt the paintings were like theatre backdrops.
It for me it felt like a very heavy dumping of archive. I thought the vitrines were beautiful, but I just felt it was a very clumsy way of kind of throwing a whole load of stuff into a space, and I don't know, it didn't move me in the way I expected it to. I saw, so many people posting and reposting and commenting on it, and I wasn't as impressed as I thought I should be.
I agree. I wanted to fall in love.
I
have
fell.
affirmed.
I fell in love. I think well, that first room, the previous picture with that painting that was so massive, it was like a theatre backdrop. It was like going into a cinema, the like size of it almost. I found as it went on, it wasn't so good. I think the last room with the pile of, was it just concrete in the middle, didn't work so well. The really big room felt like it almost ran out of steam. But I thought it was fascinating the way it was, on these warehouse shelves. It's an interesting way to show. And then all the lighting in the rooms that didn't have natural lighting was just raw light bulbs. which I've never seen before, and there'd be like 3 bulbs in the whole room, so there's dim light cast across it, which I thought was really interesting.
We started having these discussions about how
I like
we handled it.
how
Go on.
oh sorry, my connection is not very good. Yeah, I like how he used oil painting because you mentioned like he used painting like a stage background, and he combines all the objects all together and puts them into a gallery room, and but just totally change the space.
Is that Mona Hatoum?
True.
Mona Hatoum current disturbance employs a relationship of light sources, structure, and spatial setting that presents a mood as much as a visual experience.
A lot lighter touch than what we've just been looking at. There's Mona Hatoum, light sentence.
It lives more in the poetic to me than Kiefer's last, you know.
Mona Hatoum again.
The advent of the idea of contemporary art was part of a redefinition of the spaces and techniques by which art was presented. A global network of large-scale exhibition spaces enabled a spectacular scale to be introduced into the public domain.
It's a license, weather report, the takedown.
Should we have somebody else read?
Just read this one. We're getting to the end.
The idea of hyperobjects introduced the idea that objects themselves might be ubiquitous in scale. In this way, patterns related to weather or other forces might become the object of attention.
This is Sarah Z. We've very much constructed her installation works out of objects found in these pound shops.
In this untitled 2009 work by Sarah C., there is an inventive installation of a portable planetarium. Invention implies originality, and for Derrida, it cannot take place without an inaugural event. In this, it is linked to coming about of something new. Whoa. Doris Scalado generates works out of everyday objects such as chairs, tables, trees, but adds an extraordinary dimension by virtue of accumulation, subtraction, and addition.
Is Oscar Murillo, Catalyst, 2018. So paintings which have been cut up and is reassembled in space on a kind of line of.
Oscar Murillo is a painter, an installation artist, and a network operator who switches his presentational modes according to the gestalts of foreground and background.
This title is from the from painted by Paul Clay, but commentary by Walter Benjamin. Storm is blowing from paradise is taken from one of the aphorisms from his last piece of writing.
Ian Kiefer
Here.
Kayer, sorry, defines himself as a painter, but his work invariably takes the form of installation. There is also a relationship to the idea of the aphorism, which opens out the gestural dimensions of the respective works. A tonal poetics is infused in the play of parts to the whole, and this is a quality that derives from a sensibility of being a painter. In Tooth House, Kayer's interest in space and display responds to the work of the architect and designer Frederick Kistler. Among his designs for galleries and museums, Kistler created a series of window displays for Saks Fifth Avenue in 1928, while his 1942 exhibition design for Peggy Guggenheim's The Art of This Century gallery resulted in a continuous space for encountering art. The title Tooth House derives from Kistler's 1940 design for a residence modeled on the human tooth.
I was thinking about the relationship between a heavy touch and a light touch in installation. This is the Turkish Cypriot artist. Not Turkish, Cypriot. Artist Haris Epimantu. She was asked to look at a museum's holdings, and she took these ostrich eggs and made an installation out of them, the Greek Cypriot.
In the installation art of Haris Epanimonda, we are presented with a whole series of objects, images, and constructions in spatial configurations that might decompose as much as compose sense. There's a play of absence and presence, relations born out of disjunction or striation as much as smooth passage. It is as if space itself functions as the diagrammatic medium through which visibility becomes manifest.
Can I just ask about the eggs? Are they real eggs?
Yeah, they're real. They're in the museum. So they asked her to go into the archive to make a work out of the archive, and that's what she came up with. So the historical objects, you can't acquire them any longer.
Just a pile of sand in the corner of the space, illuminated by a spotlight. A brush stands by as if in waiting. Is something about to happen, or has it happened? We are left waiting. Everything appears to be in a state of inertia. Does the sand collect questions as part of its condition, or does it still the mind of such questions? We are left suspended. Space, light, substance, implement in a silent accord. Mind and matter in the process of attuning or looping. The recent history of art is woven into the development of installation as a form and a discourse. It might even be defined as the international currency that links art institutions in criticism, whereas the art market is still connected largely to distinct objects. There is within this dualism the sense that installation is related to public issues as opposed to the more private ideas of other mediums.
That's it. Are we any better off?
I was wondering, Jonathan, if we could talk a little bit about theatricality, because, you know, to my mind, it's one of those things that is kind of potentially quite a problematic issue when it comes to installation art since the 60s. I mean, some of the worst installation art is lazily theatrical, but there's always an element of performativity in the relationship of the spectator to what's going on in the space, and performativity of the materials and the objects, and and also the aspect of a kind of narrative not being too heavy-handed and didactic. And the best kind of situation for me anyway is when there's quite a sense of a narrative that is in the state of becoming or developing, especially in relation to your participation in the space. And I don't know, but I just can't help but look at a lot of things and just be kind of just repulsed by the lazy theatricality of things.
I mean, you've hit the critical point. I mean, it was a response, installation was a response to Greenbergian aesthetics and a discrete object. And it introduced theatricality to do it. In other words, you had to move around the object or had to animate, the spectator animated as much as the objects in question animated. So it was a two-way animation, which is theatrical. And it also related to new spaces, museums, and a kind of staging of spectacles, as if you're walking into a theatre set, as much as walking into an art experience. And it had a sense of, you know what to do. You interact, you jump into the space, you behave differently. So it has a certain sort of behavioral matrix attached to it. It could even be fun.
It's almost kind of like the ideal, like the perfect installation couldn't exist by the fact that it has to be kind of in a place where it automatically dictates a self-conscious way of people acting in it. Or, you know, the idea, like you say, that people kind of assume that installational art has this kind of public purpose rather than something kind of more private or idiosyncratic in that way.
Yeah, it also has a benign element, as if it's social, and it's benign social. So it kind of, it gestures towards criticality, but it sort of removes criticality at the same time. It's a bit schizophrenic. So it has the gestures of public art, but it removes the sense of a critical public discourse from it.
I think you showed a picture of the one with the string. It's by Duchamp, actually, right? The Surrealist exhibition, I think, is like 41 or something. And there was one prior to that, I think it was maybe 38. And in both occasions, the Surrealists were having their annual exhibition, and they invited Duchamp to curate it. And all he did was disrupt the whole thing. So in the first case, I think he hung 1,200 sacks of coal on the ceiling and completely killed all the light in the exhibition, so no one could actually see the work. And then I think he had Man Ray giving out torches for everyone. None of the artists were happy with this. None of the artists knew it was going to happen. And in the case of the string, he also came to the exhibition after they'd all done, and that's 16 miles of string he tied around the exhibition, preventing people to actually get to the work. And I think he paid 2 children to go there and bounce balls noisily on the floor. He didn't show up to either exhibition. And again, he was disrupting it and preventing the artwork from being seen, almost blocking the space. I think this interaction of the artwork with the space is quite interesting, because that's over and above the artist. And it really does seem to me as taking as an interesting role for the curator in such things. And going to the Auto Seeker one, I don't think initially it was intended to be this way, but that became incredibly playful. Right? I mean, he's kind of famous for it was completely occupied by children playing in the sand. They were all inside the work. There were many photos of them sitting inside the work and playing sandcastles. They kind of took over the whole space. It became very playful, and I think that was why it was one reason it was revolutionary. It was a new type of art completely. I don't think any of those were preordained in some way. It was more like, what's the word? They evolved somehow. I do feel a lot of the stuff you see is very organized, planned. I don't think any of those were in that way. They were very disruptive, and they just evolved in some way, and that's why I think they were. I think that's what makes them interesting, and that's why we remember them much more. But they were all very performative, I think, in their own special ways.
I think that's the most charming thing about the installation, the playful you mentioned, Patrick. It's like you create a space to let the uncertainty occur, and you can never redo it in another space because it's like 100% combined with a certain gallery space or a place. And also, Jonathan, I wonder what's the relationship between the sculpture and the installation? Is that refers to art history, or what do you think about this?
We got with Rosalind Krauss the extended field of the sculpture, where it's no longer a discrete object in space, but an extended object. So a mixture of land art and installation art in galleries introduced a new aesthetic of not just formlessness, but also certain kind of abjection, certain discomfort.
This idea that going to the exhibition is an event, though, and it's not a predetermined thing, is really the essence of it. I mean, it's very rare that you can get that these days, right? You're shit around in a definite route. You're not allowed to touch anything. There's no interaction. It's all preordained what's going to happen. The actual process of going through it it's not performative at all. There's no performative aspect to it. It's all preordained.
Robert Morris did an exhibition at the Tate, and they closed it down because they felt people were behaving dangerously. So health and safety took over and closed the show down. So it was very uneven in the 60s, a very uneven relationship to installation. It was seen as anarchistic and dangerous and politically unstable. So it's only with the contemporary that you get this health and safety installation aesthetic.
Another thing I want to add onto the installation is the time element. The time element, like say painting, sculpture, those object stays. Jonathan's presentation, the last page, just touched it, and something I've always thought about the installation. We have to think about, can we put it in like temporality in realm? Because installation just on that certain period of time, it is that, yes, art form, there could be message, there is whatever, but the installation cannot be auctioned out, for example. And a lot of installation thus also has sponsors, like we look at Unilever Cities and Tate, for example. And then artists are commissioned to produce something at the Carbon Hall. And after a couple of months, then it disappears. Only thing we have is a record and photos, and we talk about the experience or feeling that we had. But not like, say, Roscoe Chapel, it's painting, installation, etc. But I think that like Cornelia Parker or all the other things, how long can they stay in that form? And we go, yes, it's an event, happening is one thing of installation, but also we look at that and immerse and have that feeling and live. That's what audience or viewers have that.
I mean, there's almost a tension with a lot of installation art to become historical, to make a certain statement which is forever. So there's transient installation and installation which is it has a sort of discourse, kind of claim to a historical moment. So like the work Cuba has a historical claim by virtue of the situation it finds itself within. Other works are more transient. They come and they go. So there's definitely a struggle for conquest of time. A lot of the discourse on time, as opposed to space in sculpture, was based in St. Martin's in the late 60s. We get emergence of figures like Gibbs and George and John Hoyland, the photographer John Hoyland. You get experimental use of photography as process, as temporal as much as spatial. You get performance, you get installation.
I was just wondering, the protests that Nan Goldin's been involved in against the Sacklers, called die-ins. I think the V&A and Guggenheim in America and stuff like that. An installation, a performance happening as well as a protest, or is it just a protest?
I mean, it uses a form of demonstration, but it kind of makes it into a performance art. So it kind of it uses the criminality of basically staging and kind of making an overt political gesture. So the institutions don't know what to do with it. They've been largely successful. I mean, every institution now has disclaimed Sacklers. I mean, it's a worldwide movement, but Van Goldin kickstarted it, kickstarted a certain way of making an action, using elements of performance art to raise a political point.
Does the Royal Academy still have a secular wing? I think it does.
I think they've all had to relent. I think they've all I mean, the Royal College's painting department was secular. I think that's no longer secular. I think they've all become embarrassed. They had meetings, board meetings about it. And I mean, the secular went bankrupt in order to avoid having to make settlements. They knew they'd lose the settlements, so they went bankrupt, which was billions of pounds worth of assets put into administration because they couldn't face the court cases. I mean, it's a really interesting film on the protests and how I mean, Nan Goldin, it was like really, it was very spontaneous. They just did it. They set the whole thing up in a very fluid way. I mean, thousands of people died in the States. Thousands.
what was incredible was that while tens of thousands of people were getting hooked on these things, they were enjoying this incredible I'm thinking about some of the reading that I just did about appearing versus appearance and their desire to appear fully formed as art cognoscenti or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Like they were presenting themselves as these people that gave money to art institutions, while at the same time the revealed documentation about their chase for just capital is pretty horrifying. I wonder, with the art world sort of being the last unregulated frontier, which is a good thing and a bad thing, what sort of wild, I don't know, Wild West we're heading into now as we go in past crypto and into AI and away from oligarchs and into hyperconnectivity, what the next whiplash will be.
I just changed the subject slightly. I went to see a Damien Hirst show in the Phillips in Mayfair, just around the corner from Main Street in Mayfair. And I got the feeling that it was two types of painting. There's storms around England, sea storms, and it had a contrast with these paintings with much bigger, which were like matter. And I had this awful feeling that it's not art at all, but it's just a kind of a production, and another assemblage, another scam, as it were. It just felt so incredibly empty. I had another experience. I had one day trip for myself over the summer. I went to cathedral, and in the middle of the cathedral was an Anthony Gormley. I thought, I can't escape him, whether it's in holy places or secular spaces or exotic spaces, or you go to a mountain somewhere and there's an Anthony Gormley on the top of the mountain looking down upon you. I just wondered how long this charade of hyper production can go on. This infiltration of social space by these apparatuses of power.
It's like if you think about this sort of autocratic leaders like Stalin or well, even Putin, they kind of spray their images all over the place as well. I don't just think about that. I mean, is it any? I mean, it's obviously different because they're not. Well, maybe they are autocrats in the art world. But it just reminded me of what you said about how long do we go on having to put up with these images or these installations, and maybe think about kind of, out of control egoists, really.
With huge resources. I mean, tens of millions at the disposal.
Funding.
Yeah.
The market that's driving it, right? It's the collectors that are driving it, giving them the money,
Or the Sacklers, depending.
washing the money.
Yeah, washing them. El Lissitzky was really involved in propaganda and then anti-propaganda for a long time as a graphic designer during the war. He was involved in a lot of leaflets. I'll have to look up, but yeah, this incredible design campaign.
I mean, he did posters for the Civil War. Red Wedge defeating white circle. But it's become, I mean, it's sort of more hidden. The politics of it is more hidden. But the resource and the sense of spectacle and, I mean, the indecency of it is galling.
We sort of end up in this cycle where we're sort of talking to ourselves, we're feeding ourselves. It's like this generative AI chat GPT as well. It's just taking what's out there, regurgitating it, sticking it back in the system. So we think it's something new, but actually it's the same thing over and over again, just served up in a different way.
But also like the kind of iconoclasm that you see against these really problematic sculptures and stuff. It's classic performative stuff as well, because, you know, it's satisfying to the really short attention span, but it has no kind of structural significance, I suppose.
What to do?
Frustrate the shortened attention span and take a cue from Duchamp and disrupt the fuck out of it.
I think just
So
go and
switch the lights off.
spray paint all over them.
Which lights off?
It's the lights off, yeah.
But I mean, the question is, I guess, will all of it stand the test of time? Like, if you've got multiple Antony Gormleys, how many are going to survive, or are they just going to get sort of stripped back down at some point? I don't know, for scrap. How many do we need?
How many cave paintings do we have left? And how many must there have been? You know, how many sheets of paper have been thrown away?
I mean, the other side of this is most art is kept in warehouses and is traded internationally through networks of evading. I mean, it's a form of capital.
Yeah.
So portfolios of very wealthy people consist of 10, 20% contemporary art, which is purchased as lots. So they buy it's just another resource which is traded on the market. And you don't know which country it's in any longer. Because they're all in
A low tax destination warehouse off the coast of somewhere.
They're doing it with divisional fractional ownership, like timeshares too.
timeshares.
Go in with your friends and buy a Francis Bacon timeshare.
But also, like, you know, what's it called? Cromwell Place is a free port, and then, you know, RCA is having degree shows, or it was having a degree show. Maybe it will have it again in the future in a free port. It's just, I don't know. There's something so perverse about that.
What did you say was a free port?
Oh, Cromwell Place. When I graduated in 2021, that's where we had a degree show, and they did a couple of other RCA shows there too.
What do you mean? Why is it what's made it in? When are you just being funny, or is it literally?
No, it's genuinely a free port. As in, it has the status of a free port. It has like these kind of I don't know. Maybe someone's better at explaining how a free port works. But yeah, so basically, an artwork can come into the country, go straight into storage in Cromwell Place, be sold, and then leave without paying HMRC any
taxes.
Things like
None of the
that,
import
taxes.
Yeah. Okay, I get it.
Yeah.
Oh,
And so basically, it means that like kind of quite dodgy people can have like very portable pieces of, you know, serious value that they can move out at an instant, you know, without paying anything or any paperwork. Or it's like, you know, it's pretty shady.
Wow.
How on earth have they managed to set that up?
just
Lawyers.
free ports. There's free ports were part of an international structure of commerce. And no one's taking regulative action against it because it would restrict trade, restrict the flow of capital.
It's incredible that it still exists after Brexit, though.
And then it sits in the middle of Kensington.
It started after Brexit.
Yeah, exactly. It increased massively after.
Well, it's promoted by the Brexiteers. That's what the Tories wanted.
It's liberating capital from geographical location. I mean, that's the rule of the game.
I have a very limited knowledge on this, but I read in somewhere UK, Ireland, and Germany are among the top tax havens in Europe for business
Where?
people. England, Ireland, and Germany provide all sort of incentive that you can go to tax in legal way. So
It was before Brexit, but I think it's all removed. That's why everything is moving to France now. The art market is sadly moving to France. But I don't know, you know better. This is as far as I know. All the galleries and top art dealers are opening shop in Paris because high luxury gets taxed a lot. They used to get tax return and tax back.
VAT with that.
Yeah, but now they have to pay, so it's all moving out. It's killing the galleries here.
You can go online as a company called Masterworks, which is a New York-based company, and they buy up very famous pieces of art, like, I don't know, Celia Brown or someone like that. And you can buy anything like £2,000 worth or £7,000 worth, like a share into the artwork, and then they hang on to it for so long, and then they sell it, and then when they sell it, you get your percentage, but they obviously cream off a fair bit of the profit as well. It's driving up the price of certain artists. Like, for example, is it Yao Yao, the person who does the Infinite Mirror Room, Yao Yao? Yeah, she's one of their top purchasers. And because she's pretty elderly now, they're hoping that she might not be producing any more works, and therefore the value will go up even more. So
It's even more scandalous than that with her, because the gallery takes over the production and assembles editions in vast range of editions of sculpture. So they literally produce for the market demand the number of sculptures each year that they need to produce. And she just signs a piece of paper in New York corresponding to an object that she's never seen and never had any design over. They just produce multiples of her work in vast editions.
Well, and there's some question too about the ethical relationship between her and the people that run her production house, because she's not mentally well. And so, there's this control around her, production. It's like she's a prisoner of her own artwork.
here comes my question, like going to Yayoi Kusama's Infinite Room, that sort of thing. We'll pay like £30 entrance fee, I would imagine, over how many months? So whoever's staging this show could do their calculation, Excel spreadsheet, how much of this and how much production cost, etc. In a way, I just wonder whether that's not that different from, say, Taylor Swift having a US tour with major cities, Boston and New York, etc. Yayoi Kusama would have a show in London for 3 months and Singapore for 3 months, etc. Whoever's promoting, company behind them.
But the difference is that Taylor Swift actually gets up and sings the songs, whereas Kusama's work is produced now by the factory that's managed by the people that are managing her.
Hence the name value. Yeah, we pay for the name, don't we?
So are we saying that it is wrong for artists' work to be produced by makers?
It's not that. It's the nature of the apparatus. What the apparatus becomes. So you have a studio system where you can have anything up to 200 assistants in a given studio. I mean, Damien Hirst used to have 200 assistants.
Wow.
Jeff Koons has maybe 150. I forgot the name of the Japanese artist. He has 300. He has different, it's like a fashion company with different levels of commodities and outlets and promotions. So it's more like a industrial machinery, like a fusion between architectural practices and cinematic practices, like Hollywood, architectural global companies and fashion companies.
I wonder at which point it tips, because traditionally artists use assistant to make work for them, like even Rembrandt would get assistants to paintings, and he would do a bit sometimes.
But that was different. The artist studio was more like the university of the day.
Right.
How you trained to be an artist. If you made it through, you set up your own workshop. This is different. I mean, Jeff Koons, for instance, has a division of labor whereby no one paints a single painting. They paint, someone paints flowers, someone paints flesh, someone paints, so they have a division of labor, which is very strict. So it's all aimed towards, you can't get someone skilled in producing a Jeff Koons painting.
And the Damien exhibition you went to in Phillips, he has some sort of realistic wave paintings that wasn't painted by him, but is painted by others.
The ghost painters.
But
I don't think it's. I mean, the thing is, I think it really depends on the artist. So someone like Jeff Koons, I think that the way that you're describing the division of labor and the modes of production, that totally fits in with his kind of methodology as a whole, which also presumably Murakami, the Japanese artist you're talking about, he's all about merchandising and criticizing consumerism by being, complicit in it. I think that's different. I think someone like Gormley, he's much more guilty of just being really boring and arrogant. And it's not so much about like the level of production or the division of labor. It's more just, is on a piece. It should be taken on a piecemeal basis.
It sort of looks like which practice is based around the concept of consumerism. So Koons with toy as art and art as play and toy as consumable, and then Hirst with art as currency and currency as art. I mean, those are, and like you said, endemic, they're baked into their practices, and we're part of that original disruption, which has now become how it runs. So
it's interesting because I think it's like I've noticed that things are so visible. Like when you look at people, when you talk to people, a lot of the times you can read what they're thinking, why they're doing things, by sort of this library of information we have with body language and just generally reading people. And I noticed that, well, if I can do that with other people, they can do it with me. And so I decided that it's what we think is very visible. And I think it's with artists, I think perhaps for me, it comes with the intention of producing work. I know artists that produce work because they want to be famous. They pay others and they just quickly, they steal and they're very successful as well. And I know an artist who almost never made work herself. But I think I thought about it a lot. And I think for me, it's the intention of why you're doing things. You can have 100 workers. Like I think Gerald Richter has a big he has people who work for him. But I watched a video of him and he gets into the zone and he almost makes love to his paintings. I know he's done a lot of it, but I don't know, personally, I still like his work. Whereas I'm not sure about Damien Hirst. I see he posts videos on Instagram of him making work.
That's his practice. He posts videos of him on Instagram because that's the new commodity. The new capitalism is social capital, right? So
I am say, what am I, willing participants of this capitalism thingy bobby. 2 years ago, Gomri had the Royal Academy show, and I went there with my daughter, and we bought the drink bottle with Gomri's the man figure on it. It's a souvenir. And I was thinking, well, I'm an artist. Am I supposed to buy this sort of thing? But yes, merchandising. There was that, Gomri's everything. Yeah, books. I mean, again, RA Gallery has books and aprons and bags and everything with that. Oh dear, we live in a capitalist society.
So here's a question I'd love to pose to you guys. I used assistants. At first, I used assistants because I was unwell. And so I had people that would come and help me make my work. And then I would have people who were in the community that knew that something was going on. And so they would come over and they would learn how to make a patch on the paper. So one night when we were building the templum, we had like 6 people that were in there with me, and they all had glue guns, and I would, walking around and checking and also working. So that, to me, I still feel like that work belongs to Jessica and myself. And that we're the generators of it, but also to partially to mitigate that, but also to celebrate the fact that I don't think anybody makes work in isolation. I started putting hands under, so like, when you have the description of the work, then you would put like the year, the medium, and then I'm including the word hands and the people that actually help build the work after that. I don't know if that's part of them being part of the materiality, but I think that connecting them to the work by name is important. But also I work with, when I encounter a technical problem that I don't know how to solve, I will make a relationship with somebody that has that skill and have them either teach me or do the part of it that I can't do because I need an expert to do that part, and we'll work together in it. And then I think, I was wrestling with that same thing because I want to make my work, not just design my work. But I don't have that skill set for this bit of it that I need. And so then I would include them in the.
For instance, cinema understands its problem completely. It has a director. It has actors and actresses and technical people, and there's a complete division of labor and roles. And as an aesthetic complex, it markets it as a unique work of art if it's got that rhetoric to it, or
it's realized by many.
But it's made. They understand the process of production. I understand it's a massive undertaking with an investment of tens of millions, with a return potential of tens of millions.
That's where my work is different than cinema.
So in different spheres. I mean, in fashion, all the names of fashion designers on clothes which they've never even seen. It's just an apparatus. And the thing about a fine arts is it's kind of undergone a mutation of these different apparatuses. And it's not got a critical language to deal with it quite. And say it's very lazy. Well, Rubens got painters in a studio, like a factory assembling Rubens paint. But it's not the same structure at all. It's very
So I
lazy.
think it doesn't, the sort of exchange value of art really rely on the really kind of outdated myth of the solitary genius anyway. And also, anyway, just aside from that, I was just going to say before I forget, I think we talked before about a podcast called A Brush With by the Art Newspaper that's on all the podcast platforms, whatever. There's a really good one with Zadie Char, and she talks specifically about how she acknowledges all of the people that she works with, and she's always saying that no one really works in isolation, and she seems to have a very, very healthy attitude to it. It's really interesting to hear her talk about it. I will look that up.
I think like architecture is also like that. Architects don't build their buildings. But for me, I think it's the passion and intention and the reason why somebody does something is really important. It makes a difference between a production for a commercial reason and just making work. Because you love to make it, because you adore it, because you have to do it.
I wonder whether there is also the ownership issue. I was just thinking about Ai Weiwei's, millions and of those porcelain, was it right? Shape that was in Tate many years ago. Like Thomas made the comment, it is peculiar in art and architecture. It is Ai Weiwei's work, and yes, there was a explanation. He hired the whole village and paid them to produce this on a certain period of time, but he has the ownership. And I think going back to Duchamp, I think it's something about the art, that who got the idea and who has a means and way of making that happen. I see examples, quite a lot of my paintings stunt rely heavily on technicians from metal room. Because they have a fabric, this particular artist had a fabric hanging on the metal frame. It was all part of work. But she owns the artwork, not the technician. She has an idea, and technician came with, we can make that happen in this way, that way. Do they get credit? Not really.
Yeah, in RCA, we have technicians doing stuff for us. So, some people would design things on Photoshop and just give it to a maker and say, do it.
But do they need the credit? Do they get their payment in another way?
Yeah, but do they? I'm not sure. I have to think about that. If like when an architect or when a seamstress gets people to do things, you ask them to. It depends where the idea comes from. So I can. Yeah, go.
Yeah, that's what I mean by ownership, like how did architecture thing, or again, Ai Weiwei artwork, or Duchamp's painting. I think that's where the art is different from, say, movie or production of ballet. Yes.
Fine.
Sorry.
I think the situation is more dramatic. I think we all suspect in some sort of way that something's out of control, and that we're going towards the catastrophic endpoint where we lose all relationship to production, to outcomes, to social relations. I mean, initially the Royal College had 80 people in fine art. This year they've taken on 145 students in painting. 145. It's out of control. It's madness. It's not going to be reformed. It's out of control. It's not going to work. It's not going to produce artists of any note. It's not going to do what it set out to do. It's just going to take the money and run. It's catastrophic. The relationship between capital and fine art is catastrophic. If it's left to the machinery of the social engine, it just leads towards catastrophe. We know it, we're impotent. We realize that, which is a catastrophe. Never has humanity felt so impotent before. And we know that there's something within the genesis of art which touches the nerve of the new, the production of the future. But do we feel a new future is capable of being generated by this thing we call the art world? I doubt it. We've got to change our mindsets more dramatically than what we have been accustomed to. We're caught in common sense. It's very casual. Oh, it's just artists have always used technicians, artists have always done assemblages out of social situations. You know, it's just lazy thinking. We've got to start behaving differently. En masse.
Everyone's gone very quiet.
Because I want to rewind and rewatch that immediately. It was
Yeah, exactly. It's pretty good, Jonathan. I think we should have been videoing you and putting you on.
It's recorded.
That's our homework for next week.
He's in the dark and he's impassioned, and it's true. My question is, what does it cost the artist, really? What does it cost to say, here's how I did this. Here are the people that helped me. Like, do we not have that to give to each other?
Well, you can. You can, and some do. So, and it's I agree that it's probably better to do that than to take the assistance, if you like, for granted and not thank them in some way or acknowledge them. I think that's
I think
right.
it's thanking. I think it's that idea that everyone is an artist, you know, that Boys said, you know, that everyone is an artist. And so when you give people agency over their contribution to the overall totality of the emergence of the work, they inhabit the space of the artist. They are an extension. The artist who conceived or intended now has 8 arms instead of 2. And so it's a companionship or a collaboration, but beyond a collaboration, like when it's really working well, it's like a multi-limbed organism. And I think that if you find people that can work with you, like Ai Weiwei's, I remember watching the documentary of the people painting the stripes and the sunflowers, and how it was this repetitive work that required this really specific movement, and it employed this entire village of people who had become unemployed because of the way the Chinese government was operating, which is why he chose that township on purpose, because I think it was going to be erased. And they were ceramicists. And so this idea of making this film and saying they did this, and then I put them here, I think shines the light on this, I don't know. Yeah.
They paid a pittance.
Yes.
He was paid millions for that work.
So that's where the thinking has to change right there. The person, the